Yes, I want to talk to you this morning about first things first. Did you realise that before a word of the Bible was written, there is a story that goes before one word of the Bible was written? And the story is about Moses. God spoke to him. God sent him to Egypt. He didn't want to go, absolutely didn't. But God sent him there. And he sent him there for a particular purpose. And it was Moses who wrote the first 5 books of the Bible. But before he even began writing, there was something happened. So first things first. We find Moses wandering around in the wilderness of Midian with a flock of sheep, not very far from Mount Sinai. And you might wonder, what is the crown prince of Egypt doing, wandering around the desert with a flock of sheep? Because that's who he was, crown prince of Egypt. So you might say, well, surely there's a backstory to that. How come Moses, crown prince of Egypt, is wandering around the wilderness with a flock of sheep? Certainly there is some history. Moses was one of the children of Israel. The children of Israel were in Egypt, as you probably remember, because Joseph had been sold to a bunch of traders, and he was there in Egypt, and it was Joseph who actually saved the whole nation of Egypt. He told this story to the king. Yes, you've had these 2 dreams about the cows, the fat cows and the skinny cows, and the heads of grain, the good ones and the very poor ones. And what those dreams mean is that there's going to be 7 good years, 7 bad years. During the good years, you've got to store up the grain so that there will be something to eat during the 7 bad years. Joseph had actually saved the nation of Israel. But a bit after that, there arose a Pharaoh who didn't know Joseph. Quite deliberately didn't know Joseph. And he thought, well, this is a great idea. We've got all these Hebrews, and they're not Egyptians. And because they're not Egyptians, they're not really worth very much at all. So I'm going to make them slaves, the entire nation. They will become my slaves. That's okay, nothing wrong with that. Whole bunch of slaves, brilliant, get all the work done. But then he started to get a little bit worried because there were so many of them. He was a bit afraid they might rebel. So he made a decree that all of the baby boys were to be taken at birth and thrown into the River Nile to drown. That's okay. They're only Hebrews. They're not Egyptians. It's all right. We can do that. No problem at all. But of course, there was one baby boy who'd been saved. He was floating around in the river in a little cane basket. And Pharaoh's daughter had found him there and thought he was pretty cute and decided to take him home. And because he was then the son of Pharaoh's daughter, he became crown prince of Egypt. But of course, he was always aware that he really wasn't an Egyptian, he was a Hebrew. So one day, as he's out there on the building site, watching what's going on, he sees an Egyptian slave driver with his whip out, scourging a Hebrew. And he says, this shouldn't be. And being a man of war, he was trained as a general. He was a pretty tough customer. He went over there, he he took this Egyptian slave driver by the throat, he killed him, dug a bit of a hole in the sand and buried him. Problem was, Pharaoh found out what had happened, and that was not okay. It's okay to enslave the entire nation? Fine. It's okay to murder the little baby boys? Fine. But to oppose the nation, to oppose the empire is not okay. And there was a reason for this. The Egyptian kings believed that they were actually the emissaries of God on earth, put there to maintain order by keeping all the lesser people under control. And if the lesser people rebel, then the entire world is in danger. So when the crown prince of Egypt, no less, rebels, kills an Egyptian, he says he has to die. Moses found out about it and away he went. He found a man there in Midian. He married one of his daughters. Well, that's it. I'll never be able to do anything for my people. But God had other ideas. And so as Moses is wandering round there in the wilderness, he sees a bush burning. Now, this wasn't actually all that unusual because there were a lot of turpentine bushes out there in the wilderness, and because it was very hot, occasionally they would spontaneously just burst into flame. 30 seconds later, fire's out. But Moses sees this bush and it's burning, and it's burning, and it's burning. He said, what in the world's going on? I'm going to go and have a look. And as he approaches the burning bush, God speaks to him from the bush. And if we can have that first slide, please, guys. This is what God says. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I've heard them crying out because of their slave drivers. I'm concerned about their suffering, so I have come down to rescue them. This is the very first story. Before any of the Bible is written, this is the first story. A story of such absolute contrast to the treatment that the Egyptians are handing out. The Lord said, I've seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I've heard them crying out because of their slave drivers. I'm concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them. What a contrast. You see, for Moses and for the Israelites, they knew that God had made of one blood all the nations. Every human being, Egyptian, Israelite, Hittite, all the people, men, women, children, every one of them is made in the image of God. And it's just not okay to enslave people who are made in the image of God. It is not okay to kill people who are made in the image of God. It's not just God's got these favourites and the Egyptians are not his favourites. All people, everybody, created equal, deserving of life and liberty. That's who God is. Second slide there, please, guys, just to summarise. He's the faithful God. He says to Moses, I am the God of your fathers, of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. I have remembered my promises. I've seen the suffering of my people. I've heard them crying out. I'm concerned about them, and I am here to rescue them. Folks, that is, before a word is written in the Bible, that is the old good news. That's who God is. And so I want to say something that you might think a little provocative this morning about us and the people of Israel. Before you are a sinner, you are a victim in need of deliverance. And you might wonder, did I hear him right? I'm a victim in need of deliverance. Yes, you heard me right. The world that we live in is a world a bit like Egypt. There are the people who have power who believe that it's okay to use that power to hurt other people, to damage them. And we don't have to go to all sorts of other places in the world to see it. You don't have to go to Myanmar and see what's happening there. You don't have to go back into history and look at what Hitler did. You don't have to go to Asia and ask about Pol Pot. It's a lot closer than that. People using their power to hurt and damage other people. It actually happens here in our world. Let me give you a few names. Have you heard of a fellow by the name of El Chapo? Anybody heard of El Chapo? What do you think? Is it okay to get rich off drug addiction of other people? Is that okay? It's not okay. You've heard of Rosie Batty? Anybody heard of Rosie Batty? Anybody heard of Hannah Clark? Heard of Hannah Clark? There are people in this world who believe that because they have power, it's okay to use it to hurt other people. The fact is that all of us are living in a world that is so far astray from what God intended for us that we are all victims. In one way or another, we are victims. And God knows that. God knows that He needs to come and rescue us. And we might wonder, really, do we need rescuing? Yes, we do. And the more we discover about what God is like, what He plans for His children, the more we discover that, yes, we're a long, long way from God's ideal. And yes, the truth is that hurt people. You get what I mean? People who have been hurt other people. When I grew up as a kid, I grew up in a suburb where there were all kinds of strange things went on. People used to leave their dogs just to run wild in the street. I had to walk to school about half a kilometre away, and it was always scary. I'd look down the street, any dogs that way? Yep, there they are, I'll go that way. And one day, going the other way, in a hurry to get home because I'd done something my mother told me I wasn't to do, running absolutely flat out. There was a circus in town. I looked up just in time to avoid running into an elephant. But worse than the dogs, worse than the elephants, was a couple of boys who lived just around the corner from my house. and they used to regularly beat up the little kids. One day, after I arrived home with a blood nose, my mother said, "Well, that's it." And she did what would be unthinkable today. She went around there, she found them in their front yard and gave them a really good hiding. Yeah, I was grateful. But boy, oh boy, you wouldn't do it today, would you? But we all live in a world that is far from ideal. For many of us, and I'm talking statistically here, for many of us, we have been abused by the powerful people in our lives. Many of us. Certainly true for me. Is God concerned about that? Or has he changed his mind? Before we are sinners and hurt other people, we are victims who have been hurt. God wants to deal with the whole package. And that's the good news, is that God is a God who sees, who hears, who is concerned and comes down to rescue us. There's all kinds of things that happen to people who've been hurt in various ways. They become addicts. They suffer from PTSD. They become prostitutes. Or find that they just cannot engage in any kind of intimate behaviour because it's all just too scary. There are people, and I know this is true, many young women are afraid to walk down the street at night for fear that they might be attacked. There are people who work in Parliament House who have to be afraid of what will happen to them. We're not living in a perfect world, folks. But God sees. God hears. God is concerned. And God comes down to rescue. And I want you to know that, whatever's happened to you, whatever bad stuff has happened to you in your life, the very first thing God does is say, I love you. I want to help. And it's always going to be the same. That is who he is. That is what he's like. That is his character. The third slide, please, guys. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he saved them from their distress. He brought them out of darkness and the deepest gloom and broke away their chains. Let them give thanks to the Lord for his unfailing love and his wonderful deeds. For he breaks down gates of bronze, cuts through bars of iron. The old good news. It's still the new good news too, folks. That's what Jesus came to do. Came to save. Ransomed, healed, restored, forgiven. Who like us his praise can sing? God bless you, folks. He will bless you because that is who he is.